Hello there, welcome to the Saroid channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you, and lots of love for the year ahead and for the Christmas season. And I hope that I find you very well, because we're on part 4 of our story tonight, and what an exciting story this is too, because basically the children have discovered, this is Dougie and Bentley, that Bentley's father is in the woodgrove, waiting to enjoy a picnic with Bentley's mother, who he believes is about to arrive. But what he doesn't realise is that his wife does not know that this picnic has been planned. So let's find out what is going on here. Let's continue with part 4 of our story. "Hello, Uncle Ambrose," said my cousin Dougie, greeting my father with a big cheeky grin on his face. "I bet you didn't expect to see both of us here, did you?"
"I certainly did not, Dougie. You're right about that. You two were the last people I expected to see. How are you, Dougie?"
"I'm fine, Uncle Ambrose. But are you all right? If you don't mind my saying so, you look a little green at the gills." "Hello, Dad," I said, quickly intervening. "Dougie is right. You look kind of funny."
"I guess the two of you took me quite by surprise, that's all. You gave me quite the start, you did. Good to see the both of you. Don't you dare tell your mother, Bentley, that I'm waiting for her. It's all a surprise. She thinks she's meeting up with her friend Sally Turner. But it's me she'll find here instead. We're going to have a little picnic together."
"But Mum's not coming, Dad. She's at the farmhouse reading newspaper articles to Aunt Charlotte, while Aunt Charlotte cooks dinner. We're having spaghetti bolognese for dinner tonight. If Mum were meeting Sally for a picnic, she'd have mentioned it, wouldn't she? But she said nothing about it. She told us both not to be too long in the woodgrove. Isn't that right, Dougie?" Dougie nodded. "Uncle Ambrose, Bentley's right. I can tell you now that Auntie Coco is not coming into the woods now. She would have told us if she was having a rendezvous with her friend, but she said nothing of the sort." Before my father could answer, his eyes suddenly appeared to be growing round, and then he began to visibly shake. He started to have convulsions. His face went an ominous green colour, and his lips started to grow blue.
"Oh, goodness gracious. Something's wrong with me. I feel kind of funny. My head is spinning. My tongue, it's gone all tingly. What the hell was in the wine Sally gave me?"
"Dad, are you all right?" I cried out nervously, which was a very stupid question to ask, for any fool could see that my father was far from all right. And very suddenly he started to convulse all over again. He was foaming at the mouth like a rabid dog, his skin gradually growing greener and greener. "What is happening to you, Uncle Ambrose?" my cousin asked, looking terrified. My dad tried to rise to his feet, but he lost his balance and fell back on the picnic blanket, while he began to clutch desperately at his throat, like someone who's got something caught in the back of their mouth that they're trying to remove or regurgitate.
"My throat! It's my throat! I'm having an allergic reaction, I think. I can't breathe. My tongue is swelling up. Oh, goodness, I think I'm dying. I can't breathe."
"Dad, don't say that! You're scaring me! You're scaring me!" Everything happened so quickly, as if all 3 of us had been catapulted into the middle of the most dreadful nightmare, of which there was absolutely no escape. Let me tell you, watching someone struggling to breathe, especially someone you love more than life itself, is the most terrifying thing to have to experience, especially when there is nothing you can do to help but stand helplessly by. I could see the fear dappling my father's eyes, because I knew that this is not what he had expected to happen. "Son," he said, but I could barely hear anything he was saying. His voice was so gargled and strained. I know my father knew help would be slow to arrive in the middle of the woods like this, and by the time it did eventually come, it would be too late for him, even if my cousin ran back to the farmhouse to raise the alarm, as we would be leaving my father to die on his own, should we do such a thing. The woeful expression on my dad's face was puckered with regret, disappointment, fear, and finally acceptance at the very same time, rather like a plethora of flavours thrown into a cake mix that don't actually go well together. Finally he choked out the anguished words,
"Kiwi fruit! That bloody woman must have put kiwi fruit into the wine. I'm having an allergic reaction. Sally Turner knows I'm allergic to kiwi fruit. My God, I've been a fool. If I don't make it, son, tell everybody that Sally Turner did this to me."
Now I knew unequivocally what was going on with my father. He was having what is known as an anaphylactic shock. His airways were being gradually constricted, and he was being deprived of oxygen. We needed an EpiPen at once in order to save his life. The only thing my father was known to be allergic to was kiwi fruit. He had discovered this one night when he ate some kiwi fruit in a fruit cocktail at a wedding he attended once with my mother. The fruit cocktail was delivered to the guests before the hors d'oeuvres, which was to be an asparagus-filled cheese pastry. My father had never tried kiwi fruit before and was eager to taste it, but he had no idea he'd have such an adverse reaction to the fruit. But there are some rare individuals out there highly allergic to it, and unfortunately my father happened to be one of those people. In a trice he felt his heart pounding violently in his chest. His body grew very hot, and he began to experience all kinds of tingles on his throat, which began to swell up quickly, blocking his airways. His eyes began to bulge from their sockets, and I am told by my mother his face went from green to blue. The only words he appeared to utter to my mother at the time were, "Something's wrong with me. I can't breathe." Help came to my father immediately at the wedding, for a woman well versed in the subject of anaphylactic shocks was in attendance, as she suffered from peanut allergies and always carried on her person an EpiPen. She graciously plunged the EpiPen into my father's flesh and saved his life. We soon learnt that my father was highly allergic to kiwi fruit, which is deadly to him. My father did not carry an EpiPen on his person. They need to be replaced regularly and are extremely expensive, and it's very uncommon to find kiwi fruit added to the average American diet. Whereas with peanut allergies, they're much more widespread, and peanuts are common in America and can surreptitiously be found in many products, which is why on cereal boxes there will invariably be a warning if the factory makes cereals with peanuts on the premises, as the possibility of cross-contamination is extremely real, but you don't have a problem with kiwi fruit in that regard. My father always considered himself lucky to be allergic to kiwi fruit rather than peanuts, as kiwi fruit is not common in the American diet. But what he had not prepared himself for was a predatory woman in his life who would go to any lengths to exterminate him so she could have my mother all to herself. Sally Turner wasn't gay or anything like that. Her fixation towards my mother was not romantically inclined. She was jealous of my parents' relationship and was eager to break them both up. If she could do so, she would have my mother all to herself, and they could spend an extortionate amount of time together as a consequence. I guess in this regard, the saying misery loves company really does come to mind here. I imagine for Sally Turner, living on her own, there must have been moments for her when she felt isolated and exceedingly lonely. Sally knew unequivocally that my father was allergic to kiwi fruit, and she was banking on the fact that my dad would be dead before he managed to find any help, being stuck there in the woods all on his own. Sally Turner impassionately loathed my father, and would have loved to have split my parents up. But resorting to these kind of lethal, vindictive measures to secure her idyllic end was nothing short of murderous, and I suddenly realized there really was evil in our world. In that moment, watching my father struggle to draw breath was nothing short of terrifying for me. I was only 9, for goodness sake, and I knew leaving my dad to call my mother to find an EpiPen would be too time-consuming, and I doubted there was an EpiPen on the farm available for us,
as no member of my uncle's family suffered from any life-threatening allergies. The emergency services would take far too long to get to the farmhouse in time, never mind getting into the woodgrove. The cruel, blistering, unfair reality was that my father was about to die, and there was nothing I could do about it. I was in effect watching a drowning man meeting his end, as the life-giving oxygen in the fresh air around him was denied him so cruelly. Please God, I didn't want to lose my father like this. My thoughts screamed out so loudly that my whole body rattled and vibrated. My heart was filled with a dark, congested heaviness that filled my entire being, and the pit of my stomach was engulfed with a nausea that was so violently bad that it made me want to projectile vomit. It seemed inevitable that fate was not shining down favourably on my father on this unassuming afternoon when things had gone so badly awry. If any good had come from this dreadful situation, it was that my dad would not have to die alone. I would have to hold his hand until the very end, offering him words of comfort, but at 9 years old, I was ill-equipped for all of this.
"Don't go, son. There's nothing,"
my father croaked out the breathless words with a real struggle, as his tongue was now blue and his airways were constricted, so the air he was sucking up into his lungs was rather like drinking through a broken straw and struggling to draw in that drink. His lips were so swollen and the area around his throat extremely puffy. I knew, of course, what he was trying to say to me, but in his gasps for breath, he couldn't say the words.
I won't leave you, Dad, I promise. I'm here with you, I told him. Dougie will go and call for help at the farmhouse.
My father nodded, grabbing my hand and squeezing it so tightly I almost winced in pain because of the strength of his formidable grip that probably expressed the terror he was beginning to feel. My father was so young, far too young to prepare for death, but now he was staring it blazingly in the face, and I knew he didn't want to die, and he didn't want his end to be like this. And now I would have to watch him breathe his very last, but at least I would be at his side when the end finally came. My heart was pounding violently in my chest. I could feel every single beat. I screamed out to my cousin, who was standing there so gormlessly, like a frozen statue.
Don't just stand there, Dougie! Go to the farmhouse! Get help now!
Dougie jumped up like a clockwork clown that had suddenly sprung back into life after the battery had died, and with an almost robotic efficiency he ran back to the farmhouse to call for help, and told me afterwards his legs had felt like jelly beneath him, or as if he'd been wading through thick trenches of mud just to get to the farmhouse, as that was how physically compromised he felt in the circumstances, as like me he held out little hope for my father. I understood when he reached the kitchen. He was out of breath, and the only words he managed to cry out to my mother and Aunt Charlotte were,
Call 911! He's in the woods! Dying! Allergic reaction! Kiwi fruit!
Dad, I said, everything's going to be fine, I promise. Mum will be here soon, and Aunt Charlotte will be here as well. They're going to call the emergency services. Hold on, Daddy. Please hold on. Please don't die. Maybe there's an EpiPen on the farm. But I knew I was offering a scant hope. My father squeezed my hand and mouthed the words,
"I love you, son."
Even as he lay there dying, as he struggled to draw that vital breath, he was thinking of me and not himself. When I speak of this adrenaline-soaked moment, it may sound all drawn out and a little heavy-handed on my part, but I assure you everything was unravelling in only seconds, and yet those moments, those poignant moments, felt like a lifetime, almost as if the hands of time itself stood silently still. 1 second became like an agonizing hour. It's amazing how so much can be sandwiched together in those grueling, life-threatening seconds, rather like a suitcase being jam-packed and overloaded with so much stuff that you never imagined would fit in such a confined, restricted space. It was rather like that. My world was spinning around and around so fast at the speed of light, like a rocket shooting off into space. Tears spilled down my cheeks unabashedly, but I didn't even bother to wipe them away. It seemed like too much effort for me. I tried to look away so my father did not see I was crying, but I was terrified. I was absolutely amazed that my father had surrendered very courageously and stoically to the inevitable and was accepting his impending fate so courageously, like a soldier on the battleground that has been mortally injured and has only seconds left to live before he finally closes his eyes and breathes his very last. Looking back, when I recall that event all these years later, but I have learnt that traumatic things have a way of laying down very thick roots in your mind that are not easy to pull out once they've established themselves. I tried to comfort my father in his last moments, and all of a sudden I heard feet thundering urgently towards us, but they sounded purposeful and powerful, yet at the same time efficiently fast, like a high-powered modern state-of-the-art engine, zooming towards us at one hell of a speed. The wood seemed to vibrate with the urgency of those ponderous strides, and it sounded like a freight train was moving towards us. What on earth is that? I thought. There is no way it can be the emergency services. They'd never get here that fast, nor would Dougie have reached the farmhouse yet. And then I saw him. It was the wild man. I stared at the wild man incredulously. I could see the rise and fall of his powerful chest as his breathing was heavy. The determined gait of his square jawline and the penetration of his questioning gaze was something I will never forget as long as I live. The most paradoxical thing about this curious moment in time was the wild man seemed to know exactly what was going on with my father, without anything being articulated, like someone who's already read the crucial chapters in a crime thriller novel and knows exactly how the story will end, or how to intercede in the chapters to change the script and write a better, much happier story. It was like that with the wild man. It was like the wild man was blessed with a startlingly accurate clairvoyance and was able to see an event happen before it actually played out in our time-space. I stood there for a brief second, looking at the wild man, with a mixture of helplessness, tangled up with hope. "Help!" I cried out, pointing to my father, tears spilling down my cheeks. "Please help! My dad! He can't breathe! He's having an allergic reaction! Please, please help!" The wild man was so tall, so impressively lofty, so powerfully built and robust, but I wasn't remotely intimidated by his gargantuan size. His mighty presence gave me a profound sense that something powerful was taking over what was a fractured situation. Could I dare to hope the wild man could save my father's life? Or was that wishful thinking on my part, a fragile hope that already worn far too thin, as time was running out? The wild man was at least 9 to 10 foot tall, his body strappingly built, like a perfectly masterful machine that ran on a very smooth engine. He was rather like a Land Rover that can drive over the most challenging of terrain. He was covered with very dark brown hair, sprinkled with the occasional tufts of grey, which suggested he might be getting on in age, unless, of course, he was prematurely greying. The wild man clasped with his huge sausage-sized fingers a tool made from wood that was as sharp as a razor, and the fact that he had this tool on his person meant that he foresaw this event happening. He punctured my father's throat area, creating a hole-like incision, using the sharp wooden instrument with the kind of precision you'd expect from a highly skilled surgeon. There was no reticence or uncertainty in the procedure that the wild man performed. He was fearlessly quick and extremely efficient. Then it happened like a gift from the gods. My father was breathing again. He sucked up the air hungrily, while the blueness started to leave his puffy face. Suddenly there was hope mixed with gratitude embedded in my father's eyes, as he stared up at the wild man incredulously. It was almost as if he thought he was hallucinating, because he knew this wild man must have been sent from heaven itself. The wild man was holding a small glass Coke bottle in his hands that was filled with a strange-looking tincture. It was a sludgy green colour and smelt strongly of wild mustard and bitter herbs. He poured the liquid very quickly down my father's throat, and within seconds the swelling on my father's tongue subsided. I guess he must have known a lot about herbs, but he also knew what was going to happen to my father. And when I glanced at him and he met my gaze, the question in my mind was read by the wild man. "How did you know my dad needed help?" was the thought I directed at him, without any words actually being expressed. My thought was met with a telepathic response.
I knew this was going to happen to your father, before you even came to the farm. When you arrived here, I knew in a few days' time your father would come into the woodgrove and would ultimately need help, and I was called upon to meet his needs on his behalf from his guardians, as they have told me it is not his time yet, and he needed to be saved. I was asked to intervene on his behalf, and so here I am."
The wild man looked at my father through kind treacle-coloured eyes. He said 2 words that I've never forgotten as long as I've lived. He spoke those words out loud, "Nirana gunoso," which in my head translated itself to, "You will live," and then he simply glided away and was gone from our sight. My father was drawing in breaths of air, as if they were the elixir of his very life. A while later we heard voices, and then the EMTs arrived on the scene, along with my mother and Aunt Charlotte as well as Dougie. Their faces overwrought with an expression of impending dread, as if they were preparing themselves to face the worst possible scenario. But then they saw that my father was very much alive and appeared to be breathing. He was sitting up with a puncture wound to his neck, where the blood trailed down his neck onto the collar of his shirt. They were overcome with a tangible sense of relief, and in those moments the words that were uttered were expressed in a cacophony of thank gods and "Oh my God, you're breathing! You're breathing!" My father was placed gently onto a stretcher. An EpiPen was thrust into his flesh, even though he was breathing. The 2 EMTs looked at me wondrously when they observed the puncture in my father's throat and realized what had been done to save my dad's life.
"How old are you, young man?"
asked the male EMT, as he was looking at the puncture in my father's throat and then straight back at me. "I'm 9 years old, sir," I told him. The EMT whistled.
"You did this yourself, young man?"
he said, gesturing to my father's open wound on the throat area, as he carefully inserted a pipe into the hole, so that my father's breathing got even clearer.
"You have performed a life-saving procedure, young man. It's called a tracheotomy. How could you possibly know to do this?"
He marvelled at me in awe, looking at me as if he thought I must be a child genius of some kind, which I most certainly was not. My father was nodding profusely. He winked at me and said,
"That's right. It was my son who performed the procedure."
For some reason my father didn't want the EMTs to know about the wild man. The EMT shook his head.
9 years old, eh? And you knew to do this. That's incredible. You saved your father's life, young man. You should be terribly proud of yourself."
"Well, he must be, mustn't he?" my mother said. "You are a very clever boy, dear," she told me. My mother leaned over to my father, stroking his hair. Tears poured down her cheeks. "Oh, my God, Ambrose! You gave us such a dreadful scare. I don't know what to say. We could have lost you." While we were in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, my father was now up and talking, and the ambulance staff were amazed that the blueness had left his face so swiftly, and the swelling in his tongue had subsided. But I knew it was because of the tincture that the wild man had applied to my father's throat. "What happened?" my mother asked, wiping the tears away from her eyes. "What the hell happened?" she repeated, her anxiety now replaced with relief. "Oh my goodness, Ambrose! As I keep saying, you gave me quite the scare. When Dougie came running to the farmhouse, saying that you were in the woods, having an anaphylactic shock of all things, I thought at first that this was some kind of macabre joke. But then I saw the dreadful fear in his eyes, and I knew he was speaking the truth. When he told me you couldn't breathe, I pretty much thought we had lost you, that you were dead. I thought me and Charlotte would be planning your funeral in a day's time or so. Have you any idea, Ambrose, what that did to me? I thought I was going to have a heart attack."
"I'm sorry, love, that you had a shock like that."
"Not half as sorry as I am, Ambrose. I'm furious with you, but at the same time so relieved to see that you're alive. If I'd lost you, My mother was unable to find the words. My father squeezed my mother's hand affectionately, looking into her eyes adoringly.
You could never ever lose me, love. You're stuck with me for life, if you'll have me, he teased.
Of course I'm stuck with you for life, Ambrose, my mother said. I married you, didn't I? But I still can't digest what happened this afternoon. It's so incredibly overwhelming. I'm trying to get my head around all this. I'm surprised that you didn't end up in a wooden box. This could have ended up so tragically if it wasn't for the hole in your throat that my son put there of all things. I can't believe Bentley knew to do this. You're only 9, for goodness sake. I did not say anything at this. I could see now that this was not the right time to correct my mother and to tell her all about the wild man who had intercepted this potential tragedy with a lion-hearted efficiency, and without his gallant intervention, my dad would almost certainly be dead. My mother paused for a second, studying my father's face intently, as if she was reading a complicated book that she couldn't quite understand, and was trying to make sense of it. There was a furrow developing between my mother's brows, which only ever happened to her when she was trying to figure out something she found incredibly complicated. Her eyes were filled with a plethora of unasked questions, her body still jolting with the after-effects of all the shocks she had just endured. Finally she spoke again. The panic could still be heard in her lilt. "What on earth were you doing in Chester's Woodgrove, of all things?" she asked. "Why would you come to Chester's farm by the back route and clandestinely sneak into the woods like that? I don't understand. This is very unusual behaviour on your part. Besides anything else, I thought we agreed to keep a distance for a week. You said you were going to give me my space. Well, you told Chester that anyway. And then you rock up unannounced and hide in the woodgrove. Were you sneakily spying on me, Ambrose? Because I wasn't taking your calls. I know you were grievously upset that I wasn't talking to you. But I needed some space, that's all. And I thought you would respect that."
"What are you talking about?" said my father. "Of course I wasn't spying on you, love. I came to the woodgrove to surprise you, for a picnic, that's all."
"You did that all right, love. This afternoon has been riddled with an epidemic of surprises. If I don't have a surprise ever again in my life, I'll be extremely grateful for that. I've had enough surprises to last me a lifetime. I have so many questions littering my mind. For a start, what the hell gave you an anaphylactic shock?" asked my mother very abruptly. "The only thing I know that gives you a severe allergic reaction is kiwi fruit. And how would you ever get to eat a slice of kiwi fruit in the woodgrove, for goodness sake? None of this is making any sense to me. I don't understand what you were doing in the woods in the first place, and why on earth you managed to have an anaphylactic shock. Am I missing something here? But the dots are just not adding up to me."
"Mum, it was your friend, Sally Turner," I said abruptly. "She planned a secret picnic for you and Daddy. She told Daddy that she'd arranged to meet you in the woodgrove for a picnic, and you'd agreed to come. She was saying that she had picnics in the woods before with you and Aunt Charlotte. She said you knew the picnic spot very well. I was in the woods with Dougie, hiding behind a tree, so we saw and heard everything. I knew that Sally Turner was up to something, 'cause she was being ever so nice to Daddy, and she hates Dad. Me and Dougie heard voices, you see. We thought it was poachers in the woods, so we hid behind the tree to see what they were up to. I realised that it was Dad that was speaking in the woods, and he was talking to Sally Turner. I couldn't believe it, because they don't even like each other."
"I've never had a picnic in the woodgrove with Sally Turner, or your Aunt Charlotte before," said my mother. "I mean, Sally's come to Chester's farm a few times, I will admit that. She's enjoyed tea with me and your Aunt Charlotte. She knows the farm very well. She's even been for walks with us in the grove. But what do you mean she planned a secret picnic for me and your father? I don't understand. I knew nothing about this. I haven't spoken to Sally for several days now. What on earth is going on here?"
My father interjected.
Sally Turner called me at home, love."
"Sally Turner called you at home?" said my mother, looking completely confounded. "Why on earth did she do that? She doesn't even like you, as Bentley is quick to point out."
"I know, I thought it was odd, but she was very nice on the phone to me. Very sympathetic."
My mother looked more and more confounded. She tried to make sense of everything that my father was telling her. "Sally Turner was sympathetic about what exactly?"
"About the fact that you weren't talking to me, of course."
"Oh, please," said my mother, letting out a muted laugh. "Sally wouldn't be sympathetic about something like that. Indeed, if I wasn't talking to you, she'd be absolutely delighted. I don't understand any of this."
"I thought as much myself, but she was so terribly nice on the phone, so very persuasive, saying she knew how to get us together again, so we could have a nice chat, because you were refusing to speak to me. She said she hated to see you and me fighting over something so trivial as money."
"Did she now? Now that's very interesting," said my mother. "So Sally was the mastermind behind this so-called ingenious picnic that I knew nothing about. Is that right?"
"Pretty much, love. When Sally contacted me, showing such genuine concern, I really thought I'd misjudged your friend. I felt like such a heel for saying all the nasty things that I have over the years about your friend wanting to break us up."
My mother frowned. "Don't you get it? I've always liked Sally Turner's friendship, love. But I can assure you wholeheartedly, she would love nothing better than if I was to serve you with divorce papers. She prattles on at me at great length about how it is in my best interests to leave you. She claims I'm miserable because of you, Ambrose, and she says I'm very unhappy, and that I'd be so much better off without you in my life. But I've always told her that I would never ever divorce you."
"You told her that?"
asked my father, looking quite startled by my mother's frankness.
"But I thought,"
he muttered. My mother raised a brow again. "Please don't tell me, Ambrose, you thought I'd divorce you over a few outstanding bills that we haven't paid. I would hope you wouldn't believe that I was that shallow. I love you, Ambrose, more than life itself. You're a mug, and yes, we both have our moments. Yes, we fight from time to time. And sometimes I have thrown the divorce word around rather too frequently. But I've never ever meant anything by it. Yes, I fancied a little space after all the arguing we've had recently, which is why I came to Chester's Farm. But no, I wouldn't like a divorce, although I've thought about it occasionally, when you've made me really mad. But if the truth be told, when my emotions finally settle down like a pond that has been stirred, and I come to my senses, my first thoughts are always the same, and that is that I would never ever want to leave you, Ambrose. Not for all the tea in China. And China makes an awful lot of tea, so I'm told. And in case you ask, no, there is nothing that Sally Turner can do to change my mind on this. She's always known how much I love you. You cannot help who you love, can you? So what exactly did Sally Turner say to you before all this came about? Make me make sense of this bizarre story."
"Well,"
said my father, rubbing the day-old stubble on his chin reflectively,
"Sally told me to drive over to Chester's Farm, to take the back road, to park my car there. She told me to follow the footpath into the woods, where she would meet me. She was setting up a picnic for you and me. She couldn't bear to see us at each other's throats. Well, that's what she told me. She said she would tell you that she was meeting up with you in the grove for a girly chat, with a picnic and some good wine to drink. But instead of meeting her there, you'd be meeting up with me, so we could talk and enjoy some good wine together. And, settle our differences, so to speak."
My mother's face grew decidedly pale. "That sounds nice and cosy, does it not? I knew nothing about this. Sally never contacted me to tell me she wanted to meet up for a picnic in the woods. And if she'd done so, I would have turned her down at once. Instead, I would have asked her to come to Chester's farmhouse for tea. I certainly wouldn't have wanted to enjoy a picnic in the woods at this time of the year. You get eaten alive by midges, and I can't stand the things. I don't find that very pleasant. Oh, goodness gracious, said my mother. Sally knows you're allergic to kiwi fruit, Ambrose. I remember telling her the story once about what happened at that wedding, when you very nearly died. You don't suppose she—"
My father nodded. I rather suspect Sally Turner deliberately put some kiwi fruit juice into the wine. It was a fruity concoction, so I wouldn't have noticed it. She encouraged me to drink a few sips before you came into the woods, claiming it would give me some Dutch courage. The moment I drank that wine, something was very wrong. My lips and tongue were tingling.
So what was her duplicitous plan, then? Asked my mother, trying to string the pieces together in her mind like a jigsaw puzzle. So my friend Sally gave you wine laced with kiwi fruit, and you drank a few sips of it. Then she drove away. But I assume she would have come back much later to ensure you were dead, because that was her plan. She wanted to kill you. Then she would have buried your body in the woods. I suspect she knew that if you were in the woods it would be easy for her to bury you, because a man's body is very heavy to move around, and burying you in the woods would have been pretty straightforward. She would clandestinely remove all the evidence of what she'd left behind from the picnic. Then I suspect she'd have driven your car from the back road straight back home and parked it in our driveway, so the police would not be able to figure out why your car was parked in the driveway, but you had gone missing. Then Sally, I imagine, would have got herself back to the back road and taken her car home. My goodness gracious, she'd have deceived us all. I can't believe she did something like that. We'd be wondering what the hell had happened to you and why you'd gone missing. And then Sally would pretend to comfort me in my grief. And then slowly but surely she'd persuade me and Bentley to move in with her. And you know something, Ambrose, I probably would have done so. The woman is a calculating, cold monster. I cannot believe I ever had any time for her.
My father nodded. I knew Sally Turner did not like me, and would like us very much to get a divorce. But to go to these extreme lengths to plan my demise, or exit from this earth, is nothing short of despicable. She had it all very nicely worked out, did she not?
Wait until I get my hands on her scrawny neck, said my mother. I'll kill her myself. See if I don't.
Leave the police to deal with her, love. Don't even spare that woman a second thought. She'll be trespassing on your valuable time, and she's not worth it.
But you were so right about her. Why didn't I listen to you? Said my mother, letting out an exasperated sigh. So was my brother Chester, and Charlotte as well. They all advised me against her. They said she was poison, but I refused to listen. I can be my own worst enemy at times, can I not, Ambrose? I mean, when we were at school together, Sally Turner did hateful things to me, but I figured out she was just jealous. I felt desperately sorry for her at the time, because none of the boys gave her even a second of attention. She wasn't exactly an oil painting back in the day, you know. And over the years, well, she does look rather like a bag lady now, does she not?
It has nothing to do with the way Sally looks, love. Many men fall in love with very ordinary, plain women, but in their eyes those women are beautiful to them, because nothing is more attractive to a man than a modest woman with a kind and gentle spirit. If Sally had been like that, she might have had men beating down her door to get to know her better.
You think so? Asked my mother, looking seriously doubtful.
Yes, I do,
said my father emphatically.
Put it this way. People always make out that men are desperately shallow, and that all we care about is the outside veneer of a woman, and not the inside. I will admit some insecure men out there are like that, But for the vast majority of men, the way a woman looks is not the determining factor of whether we would marry her or not. We are looking for a life partner who complements us, who brings out the best in us, who can warm up the cockles of our heart on a cold winter's night, someone who makes us laugh and smile, someone who we enjoy being with. Most men want something much deeper than just a pretty face. Actually, in my experience, it's women that are much more visual than men are, although they say the reverse is true. But I don't agree with that for a second. Men are much more forgiving about a woman's appearance than a woman is about a man's appearance. For a man, if a woman has a great personality and a fabulous sense of humour, we feel as if we've won the lottery. Don't get me wrong. I know you get beautiful women out there who are toxically poisonous. But men, when they find out about that, they'll keep a safe distance from such a woman. I think we have an inbuilt personality radar that can pick up spite so very fast, and nothing turns us off more than a vicious woman with a swearing tongue. Sally has always been vicious. I'm sorry, love, but she has.
Goodness gracious me, Ambrose. I have never thought of things in this light before. I truly thought Sally's shortcomings were all physical. But now I come to think about it, her personality and her attitude to life, and most especially men, stinks. It's hardly surprising she's single, is it?
Finally the lady gets it,
said my father with a grin. I'm glad to say that Sally Turner admitted to attempting to murder my father. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. My mother has never spoken to her again. And as for the Bigfoot that rescued my father, we told my mother the entire story of the wild man, so she insisted on leaving a basket of goodies for the wild man in the grove on the same date every year, when my father so nearly lost his life. The basket is always cleaned out, but the Bigfoot leaves us a present in return from nature, with eagle's feathers in it, or a leather thong necklace, interesting stones, or even a piece of petrified wood. So he's definitely out there somewhere, and I guess must be getting on in age now. As for my mother and father, the fighting all stopped. My dad got a better paying job, and things went swimmingly. So it goes to show that when you get so close to losing someone you love, you never take them for granted ever again. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.